Hi, today I'd like to introduce Kelly Mathis. And I met Kelly about a year and a half ago now. And Kelly is actually a student that took my trauma-informed course. And she's here today to talk about how trauma-informed has influenced both her teaching and her parenting. So welcome, Kelly. Thank you for joining me today. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So, Kelly, how has the trauma-informed affected your teaching, first of all?
I think it has, learning about it is fascinating to me because there's anxiety in my family. There's other mental health issues. And, we know we all have some sort of trauma. But I think in my teaching, when someone comes into a Pilates class or a reformer class, or even a boot camp class, you can kind of see where they're holding things when they're doing a specific movement or a specific series. And I think knowing the connection between trauma and where they're holding it in their body has changed the way I cue, has made me probably more empathetic and slow down more and connect more with my students, and being able to kind of know that if someone's up here, I can co-regulate with them to help them bring their nervous system down. So I think there's so many components between moving through the trauma while staying in our scope of practice, right? Trying to see where they're holding and be able to cue them to move through it, to give them choices and autonomy to feel comfortable in a class, because so many people walk into specifically Pilates, because we have this kind of stigma, and they're very overwhelmed and they're very unsure, and everybody thinks that they have to have it perfect and that they can't come into a class until they know they can do it all, right? And so I think creating a space, or trauma-informed movement has helped me create a space that feels safer for people to come in, and more empathetic and more understanding in my cues, in the way I talk, in the way I teach, and even the setup of my classes, to hopefully help them just feel more confident in themselves moving their bodies and not so self-conscious, I guess is the word. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was wonderful. And what about your parenting? How has it impacted your parenting?
So I have 2 adult children and a teenager, and I think it has affected my parenting in a tremendous way of being able to, one, understand my own trauma and how that has shaped how I parent and work through that. And 2, to see that my kids have had trauma that I may not have seen as trauma, because we had 2 totally different perspectives on an event. And to know how they're holding it in their own bodies, and they all 3 have anxiety and express it in a different way. With my 17-year-old, I've used so many tools to help co-regulate with her. The 20-second hug I talk about all the time. It's her favorite thing. And every morning before she leaves, she's like, need a hug. And we hug for 20 seconds and just it regulates both of us. Just using those tools in conversations with them, in talking to them about things that are going on in college or in adult life, and the struggles that they're having. It's made me have a better vocabulary, I think, and a better understanding of, I may not know what their trauma is, but I understand, can be empathetic about what they're feeling and what they're going through.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that it's also, you've used the word empathetic a couple of times now. Mm-hmm. What about compassionate?
Oh, for sure. And I think even compassionate with them, but also compassionate with myself.
Yes.
To say I did the best I could.
Yes, but also understanding that every single day we all walk through things that can affect us on so many different levels, and being empathetic and compassionate and understanding not only of ourselves, our clients, your children, maybe even your husband, mm-hmm. and how that has shaped where you are right now.
Yeah. And I also think that it gives you a different perspective to look at things. I know you and I have talked about this before. Instead of looking at somebody and saying, what is wrong with them? It's more of like, what happened to them?
Yeah.
And that changes your whole outlook on the person you're interacting with.
Yes. And I also think that there's so much, there's just so much upheaval right now in society. And I think that when we can teach with I call it an open lens, but thinking about it from the nervous system, and the stuff that you talked about is co-regulation, which bottom line is nervous system regulation as well.
Right.
And we don't really understand. I mean, Stephen Porges has done a ton of tremendous work with the polyvagal theory and the nervous system work. And I think it's still relatively new for a lot of people. It's just new for a lot of people. So I'm really glad to hear that you're using those tools like that on a consistent daily basis. And I'm glad you're seeing results with your daughter. So how else has it impacted you? And even with other people, I know we've talked about, even as a daughter, I know that you've talked about it in relation to with your mom and how it's impacted.
Definitely changed my relationship with my mom in realizing, I think as a child, no matter how old you are and no matter how old your parents are, you kind of look at them as they have all the answers and they, or they don't understand. And I think that I look at it differently now, knowing my mom was raised in a different time and she has her own traumas and she has her own things that influenced her parenting and her things. And as we were growing up, they didn't share all that with us. It was not something that was open. So there's no compassion or empathy when you just assume that they don't have any trauma. Why would they have any trauma, right? Why would they have any issues? And kind of looking at things differently, going, oh, I'm having, these issues, but my mom also had some of these growing up or parenting or things like that. And kind of just taking a different, like you said, a different lens and not looking at it through that me lens, I think, is how it affects me, but looking at them as a whole person. So it's definitely changed the relationship where I think we have better conversations. We are more understanding of each other. We can talk about trauma, which is something we've never been able to talk about before. We can talk about anxiety in a way we've never been able to talk about before. And it's really changed my relationship, I think, with my mom for the better, to understand trauma and how our body holds it. And then to apply it when you're in these relationships, you look at people differently.
Yeah.
I think you have less bias when you.
And that's a really, for me personally, it's like moving beyond and opening our eyes around biases and for us to, and I say, I guess I should reframe that. And it's like opening up hard conversations and having understanding that we all have biases, but sometimes we have to dig a little deeper in regards to where those biases come from and how do they impact us, but also how do they impact our teaching?
Right. Right.
And
I think sometimes we don't even realize that it's impacting our teaching.
No.
Or the environment that we've created for clients to come into.
Yeah. And it's really, there's just been so many things. And I've been very vocal in the last few weeks about talking about lots of different things, but I've talked about, I did a video and it was entitled, It's Not Fat. It's not about being fat or thin. There's so many other layers of people's identity people's emotions that are connected to so many things. And it's just, I'm asking the harder questions is what I'm doing.
Right.
And I think either people,
go ahead. Sorry.
And either people are going to stop and listen, or they can just not follow me anymore. Right. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Well, it's kind of like peeling back the curtain, looking through that trauma-informed lens. We're opening up, we're shining light on the things that have stayed hidden for so long. And you think about, you talked about the weight bias and the diet culture bias and stuff like that. And if you think about people walking into a gym, the courage it takes to open that door for the first time, knowing when you walk through that you are going to be judged by whoever's in there, and trying to change the narrative of it being about weight to it being about welcome. I'm so glad you're here for your health. Changing the narrative to say it is not about what size you wear. It is not about how big or small you are. It is about you being here to take a step in your health journey.
Yep.
And that is, I think, what is hard for some people, because then it calls out the fact that they're judgmental when someone walks in the gym, but it's a human reaction. It's just kind of changing the narrative to say we don't have to be like that. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely it does. And honestly, Kelly, that's the kind of like the messaging behind so many other pieces of when we talk about biases. I mean, there's just so many, and it's so multi-layered, multi-layered. And we're not going to get into a lot of the multi-layers of being biased, but it's also, it's really important. And it's not necessarily that we have to share our biases with people, but it's having an understanding and saying, and then really thinking about how are you going to, if you meet somebody that falls into your, I have a bias category, how are you going to work with them respectfully?
And I think that if you can really put that bias aside, knowing you have it, right, and get to know them as a person, you realize that bias is not really justified most of the time. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, is we categorize people in these groups, and then we exclude them or include them, and we don't actually look at them as people, as individuals anymore. And it becomes this culture of hating the other side or not good enough or whatever it is in social media, in the news, and everything else. It takes away that person's self, like that specific person's identity. Like, you are not understanding, you are not getting to know them. You are only knowing what you see or assume about them.
Yes. I was going to say, no, that's a really good way to put it, because it's like, you think about, like, we don't really know their story.
Right.
And that's why before we came on, just, it takes deep courage to look inside yourself, because the change has to start with us.
100%. And
staying there and listening and sitting still. What are the messages that your stories are telling you? And sit with that story.
Yes.
And we don't, and our stories don't have to define us. Our stories don't define our past. It's when we can move into a different realm and have a different narrative for our stories, kind of like what you just talked about in regards to the narrative around your relationship with your mom. And moving forward, it's vastly different.
It is.
And I just think from a trauma-informed lens that there's a lot of people that are coming into our studios that are coming with unresolved trauma. and not necessarily want to talk about it or willing to talk about it. They don't have to. That's
right.
not our job.
That's not our job. Right.
It's not our jobs. And it's not for us to speculate what might be wrong, but just have an understanding that somebody's coming to us and I really wonder what happened.
Right. And how can I help them connect with their body?
Yes.
To move through where they're stuck. Right.
Yeah.
So that's the way I look at it. Like, okay, I can see this person is stuck in their hips, right? How do I use what I know about Pilates and personal training and fitness to guide them to kind of let some of that go? And they don't have to talk about it. I don't ever have to know what it is. I don't have to know the story. I just have to be compassionate to know that there's something there. Right.
Yeah. And that's where the empathy, the compassion and understanding allows things to evolve by giving them a voice, by giving them choices and giving them agency. And I love the idea that, in time, people start to unravel and begin to connect with their bodies. And not be so, I can't tell you how many times I've read posts on Instagram and Facebook about clients who come and they want to talk. And there's just a multitude of things. And there's a reason why they're not connecting with their bodies.
Right.
So we have to find, I like to use, we have to find the tools that are going to help us unlock it. And through the trauma-informed lens, but also nervous system regulation and nervous system work is where we begin to help them find the tools that are going to speak to their bodies.
Right. And the tools are different for everybody. I think
absolutely.
Sometimes when we think of trauma, we think of it as I was in an accident, I was abused, I was, something big, but there are so many things that happen that are unseen and unknown in someone's life, and that they hold and they feel shame, or they feel, they totally disconnect from their bodies. And I think realizing that it doesn't have to be something that we consider big, it's still trauma, right? And so when they come in, it's how do we help them? How do we guide them in ways to move, to find the right tools, right? Yeah. And I think that is probably one of the misconceptions about trauma informed is it's not big. It's in every Pilates room. It's in every gym you've been in. Everybody has some sort of.
But the other thing too, Kelly, is I've written, it's called Trauma Impacts Movement. And I started with just a core, just a small section of trauma informed. But it's evolved into this much broader and much deeper approach that allows us to go deeper in regards to working with a whole person approach.
Right.
And, all the things that we're talking about are a part of that trauma impacts movement approach. And it's evolved over time. I'm in my second iteration of it right now. And it's something that I feel is tools that can be easily implemented. I know, and you've talked about it. So, but
yeah, and using them in class and learning how to use them in a class. I mean, my reformer classes are not big. There's 3 people. But when you walk into my reformer room and I feel the energy of clients that are definitely their nervous system is elevated, I now have the tools to say, okay, let me change my plan. We're going to start with some nervous system work. We're going to start with some breathing. We're going to get them regulated so that we can do Pilates class, and then we'll go from there. It's not coming in. It definitely changed my perspective taking the class on coming in with a plan, and this is what we're doing, and we have to get through this in class. It helped me to look at my clients and say, oh, they need something different today. This is not, it definitely changes. It changes that lens you look through.
And it's really about, I like to use the word, it's supplemental tools for your toolbox, whether you're doing Pilates or you are implementing it for personal training.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that the whole process has changed my life in a way that has impacted my relationships with my family, with my friends, with my coworkers, with my clients, with the way I teach, with so many things. It's led me down a journey that I feel like has helped me grow as a person, and in turn be able to help other people move in a better way. Does that make sense?
It does. Would you say that it's had a ripple effect on you, Kelly?
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. It's, you can't help because you're making changes within yourself. And even though it's not a course for us to diagnose ourselves,
right.
It still impacts us in a lot of different ways.
Yes.
And I can only say to you, the journey for me from like when I first started writing the course to where I am right now, and I'm getting ready to do a third iteration of the trauma informed movement, and adding in like things like this video.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a part of letting people know that it's so much more than trauma. Yeah, I'm honestly saying trauma informed and more, because it's definitely looking at it from a different perspective, in a different lens.
Absolutely. And I think it not only, as you learn about trauma in the body and the nervous system, you not only learn how to help your clients, but you also realize, oh, this helps me, because you're practicing it yourself. And you change in a way that others can see, and they go, what are you doing? And, you can share it. And it is that ripple effect. It is, looking at people differently and kind of letting a lot of the bias go, because you see them as a person instead of a person of the LGBTQ community, or a person that's overweight, or a person that's disabled, or a person that's of a different color, or, whatever it may be. You are I feel like it makes you more open to let all of that go and say, I see you as a person. And that's what your clients want. And that's why they keep coming back.
Yeah.
It's because
and that's so like, that's such a wonderful way to, bring our conversation to a close, that it's accepting of, it's just making us look through like biases, and it's making us look through a different lens. And that's a part of, being trauma informed.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, when you think about all those groups that you just talked about, there's trauma in each and every one of those.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. There's trauma in all of us. Like,
yes. So Kelly, thank you so much for our conversation today.
Thank you.
Please stay on the line, and I will chat with you when we're done.
Okay.